This big show continues our discussion in the Great Depression unit, and it's on the first New Deal. If you were to tell the history of your life, what person would have to be included in that story? Well, you cannot properly tell the story of the 20th century in America without including much about Franklin D. Roosevelt. The Great Depression was raging on. As we talked about previously, the unemployment rate by 1932 was reaching 25%. 1 out of 4 Americans who were looking for work could not find work. Long lines for free soup and coffee, and homeless, and a devastating situation. Herbert Hoover was the president, and as we had talked about previously, reminded us that everything was going to be okay, and that if with very little government interference, the economy would correct itself, even though he did do more than some real conservative people wanted him to do with the government. He really wanted to keep the government out of the economy. In the election of 1932, that November, we have Hoover, the Republican, against Franklin Roosevelt, the Democrat. The election didn't go well for Hoover. As you can see, he was able to win a smattering of states in the Northeast. Unfortunately for Hoover, he couldn't even win his home state of Iowa. He was only able to gather about 11% of the Electoral College vote, and FDR had even 57% of the popular vote. FDR comes into office with this New Deal that he had promised. Franklin Roosevelt was elected president in 1932 following his promise of a New Deal for Americans. In his first 100 days in office, he introduced a flood of legislation designed to rescue banks, industry, and agriculture and provide jobs for the unemployed. In his inaugural address of March of 1933, and just as a side note, in these days, they were still not, the new president wasn't starting until March. Today, that would start at the end of January, around January 20th or 21st. Roosevelt tells Americans the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And he outlines his plan of action, this beginning of a New Deal. He starts immediately on March 6th with a bank holiday. He ordered the suspension of all banking transactions effective immediately. For the rest of the week, Americans would have no access to banks or banking services. It was designed to stop bank runs and bank closures. Remember, we have talked about this previously. In a bank run, a bank only has a fraction of the deposits in its facility the people have deposited. The rest is lent out. If everyone comes in, or many people come in to demand their money back, when the bank is out of money, it's going to close its doors and everyone will lose, except for the first few people who get their money. So this was designed to stop bank runs and bank closures. But it went a step further. With the Emergency Banking Act on March 9th, as soon as examiners found them to be financially secure, banks would be allowed to reopen and be given additional funds from the Federal Reserve banks to cover withdrawals. That next was set up the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The federal government would guarantee bank deposits up to $2,500. This is still in place today, only now your deposits are covered up to $250,000. And your free financial advice of the day, if you have $1 million, don't put it all in one bank, because your deposits are only going to be covered up to $250,000. The Homeowners Loan Corporation was a government-sponsored corporation designed to refinance home mortgages in default to prevent foreclosures, keep people in their home. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration of May 1933 gave federal money to states to create unskilled jobs in local and state governments. Pictured here is a FARA camp for unemployed women in Pennsylvania, teaching them typing skills so they can an opportunity for them to learn new skills to be able to get jobs and become productive citizens. One of the most successful programs of FDR was the Civilian Conservation Corps. Public Works program for young unmarried men ages 17 to 28, and they'd earn $30 a month. Now, I know that the average wage for a factory worker is $70, but the problem is there weren't any factory jobs to be had. So these young men had nothing. They didn't have much in the way of education. They didn't have much in the way of skill. They really had not many prospects at all. This gave them a place to go, money, food to eat, places to live, and jobs to do. They built bridges, roads, and parks, and planted forests and forest protection. They did many, many things. Many of the parks and things created are still in existence today. In its 9 years of existence, over 3 million young men participated. Now, you might ask, why did it stop in after only 9 years? Because of World War II, the young men had another place to go now, rather than building roads and bridges and dams and forest reclamation. The National Industrial Recovery Act authorized the president to regulate business and promote fair competition. It created the NRA, the National Recovery Administration, and the PWA, the Public Works Administration. The NRA was set up to eliminate cutthroat competition by bringing industry, labor, and government together to create codes of fair practices and set prices. Eliminating this kind of cutthroat competition was designed to help business grow and everyone grow rather than many fail. The PWA was large-scale public works construction agency, and they built bridges like the one pictured here. They built things like dams and bridges and hospitals and schools, and they spent $6 billion of 1930s money, about $107 billion today. The Securities and Exchange Commission was formed to set up to protect investors and maintain fair and orderly markets. This is still in existence today. And the Agricultural Adjustment Act was set up to reduce agricultural production by paying farmers not to plant on part of their land and kill off excess livestock. Its purpose was to reduce crop surplus and therefore raise the value of crops. For those of you who haven't had economics yet, you'll learn when you do the relationships between supply and demand. As the supply of something goes up way above demand, and as many farmers are able to produce much more than they could sell, the price is driven down. This kind of practice, even though this was criticized at the time, in some ways is still done today. In some aspects of this is still used today. Because farmers can produce so much that the price is therefore driven down and they get less for what they grow. And finally, the Tennessee Valley Authority provided navigation, flood control, electricity generation, fertilizer manufacturing, and economic development to the Tennessee Valley. The Tennessee Valley is one of the poorest areas of the country at the time. Many people who lived there had no access to electricity until this program went into place. And that's a brief look at the first New Deal.